DJ's remote. Joel is absent. Rob is coming in.
Good morning. Welcome to the March 8th Grants Pass City Council Workshop. First up on our agenda today is a discussion about Dollar Mountain financing. And it looks like we have our park superintendent with the presentation. Oh, I guess just for the purpose of roll call, I believe we have DJ Frazier on the phone. Is he on the phone?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm here.
Hi, DJ. And Joel King is absent today, and Rob Pell is in the room, but not quite at his seat yet.
Number one. First on the list. Most definitely. Let's make one.
Whenever you're ready, Wendy.
Good morning. I'm Wendy Giordano, the Parks Superintendent, and joining us remotely is Dan Miller with the National Park Service and John Paul Bowles with Destination Management Advisors. Our discussion today is about Phase 1 trails for Dollar Mountain. So today's discussion is a request to proceed with the Dollar Mountain Phase 1 Trail Project, RFQ, relationship to council goals, maintain, operate, and expand our infrastructure to meet community needs. So just a very brief background to how we got to where we're at now. Dollar Mountain was purchased in January 2019 for $1 million to develop into a recreational trail park. Developing a forest stewardship and recreational use plan is a 3-star item from the 2019 strategic plan. Council was presented an update on planning and work performed, along with a request to proceed on the Phase 1 trail project on November 16th of last year. And then we also provided financial details on the Dollar Mountain project on December 7th. At that December 7th meeting, Council decided to wait for a decision until the new councilors were on board. So along with the core planning team, this is just a large overview shot of the draft plan that's been put together using expert input, topography, and looking at how we can best utilize the loops system. So the Phase 1 trails would be the cell tower to the bottom trail, approximately 2.4 miles, and the cost for that would range between $50,000 and $75,000. The Dollar Mountain existing trail, that's that steep trail that you connect to off of Crescent. The sections that you see in orange would be rerouted and made to be a little bit easier terrain for people to get up and down. The cost for that is approximately $5,000 to $15,000. And then the last part of Phase 1 trails would be the High Glen Loop connection, approximately 1.75 miles, and the cost for that section is $35,000 to $60,000. So the timing for trail construction needs to be when it's not in the dead of winter or during the hot, dry summer months. So we're looking at a potential schedule of the RFQ in April with construction if the contractor selected has the time available either in the spring of 2021 or right when it starts getting a little bit more moisture in the soils in November. So to summarize the cost implication for each section, the total estimated cost for Phase 1 is $90,000 to $150,000. The revenue source would come from LB 6370 Dollar Mountain. We currently have just over $667,000 in available funds for the development of Phase 1 and any additional matches for future grants. So out of that $660,000 is $485,000 from general fund that happened when the River Road Reserve transfer took place, and an additional $100,000 of lodging tax. Both of these amounts were approved in the fiscal 21 year budget process. And then, of course, staff resources and volunteer maintenance from Rogue Valley Mountain Bike Association. So the call to action is at your discretion. Alternatives could be directing staff to proceed with the RFQ for the design build Phase 1 trails, move to an additional workshop, or postpone the RFQ for Phase 1 trails. So with that, I can open it up to questions. As I said, Dan Miller is logged in remotely, and he can answer any specifics with the trail construction that we're planning for, and also open up his map so we can zoom into different areas if you are interested in that.
Questions, Rick?
Thank you, Wendy. Last year's on the budget, didn't we have $129,000 that was a carryover, and is that represented in those funds there?
Yes.
In which, can you go back to the accounting? So where is that $129,000 in those?
So that is included if you take the $100,000 and $485,000, and then you have the rollover from the prior year minus some incidental expenses, primarily associated with the Crescent parking lot development. We have some engineering fees for that design development. And we did receive, we have pending authorization on the Title II grant for the construction, which would cover the vast majority of the cost of that parking lot. So the money that we did have set aside for the parking lot is now going to be able to be used for other projects.
Valerie?
Yes, and on that funding, the $100,000 lodging tax, has that already been taken from the previous year's lodging tax, or is that proposed in the coming? Just out of curiosity.
That was already budgeted out of last year's budget process, so nothing new for this upcoming budget review is included in this. This is the project as it exists and was approved last year.
Okay, thank you. And the grant that we received is approximately $88,000, is correct? Is that correct for the parking lot? And did that go through the Planning Commission? What stage is that in right now?
We are getting ready to go back to the Planning Commission. We're asking for a variance on the landscaping requirement. Typically, our code is addressing parking lots in an urban setting, and you want to see certain trees and plants in those locations, and this is just unique because we're just clearing a spot out of an already existing forest to make a parking lot, and to add artificially landscaping is something that we're trying to work with that and applying for a variance so that we don't have to install lawn or sprinklers in an area that it wouldn't, in my opinion, be appropriate.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Brian?
Thanks, Wendy. I just had a question because before this presentation, I was under the impression that we would be considering approximately $75,000 for one trail to be done this year as part of Phase 1. And now we're seeing up to $150,000 for two trails. So was that added recently, that Highland Loop piece? Because I don't recall that being in my mind before I saw this presentation.
The same two new trails and the renovation of the existing trail were always part of what was recommended as phase one. But it's been a little bit of time since we did that full presentation. It's been several months, so it may look new just because of the time between last presentation and today.
Okay, and then the other question I have is, the estimated cost is between 90 and 150,000. I'm just wondering why there's such a disparity or a wide gap in that estimate.
I'm hoping that Dan Miller can elaborate a little bit more on that. It's our understanding that one of the big costs in trail development is mobilization. And since this is such close proximity to the city, using the higher number for typical trail building that's out in much more remote locations at the high end, and then the lower end, knowing that our contractor has a very quick route to get their equipment and people up to start building these trails.
Thanks.
Valerie?
Yes, I just want clarification on it. I do actually remember, Brian, that I do remember that it's my understanding that the old trail, which I was actually up there a week ago Sunday, because I happen to I enjoy hiking this a lot, is the trail up is a walking-only trail, and it has been well-maintained, I will say. Just since this last year, I have seen some really positive changes by the trail group. And then the green is a mountain bike trail, am I correct? So go back to the slide before that, I believe. Yes. So it's my understanding that it's the red-orange is the one that's going up, and mountain bikes would have to walk their bike up that, if I'm correct. And then the green is a continuation or a mountain bike trail, I believe. And then the Hegland is from the northern, there's a trailhead at the beginning there that just allows the people to go up to the cell tower, which when I was up there, I did see people coming up from that direction. So they could technically come from that direction, go all the way up and go down to B Street, because it's a continuation of the trail, correct? So I just wanted to make sure, and that does not include bicycles. That is just a walking trail, am I correct?
Dan, if you're on the line, please feel free to speak. It is, at this time, we're proposing shared use. In the future, when more trails are developed, then we'll have enough to have separate trails for bikers, especially the downhill only, where they pick up quite a bit of speed, and you don't want to run into hikers on that trail. So the ones that we're proposing right now are going to be shared use. The uphill, it would be uphill only for that original Dollar Mountain Trail that you see in the red and orange.
Yes, and what is the blue one? I understand the Dollar Mountain.
Wendy, can you hear me?
Anyway, the red one I see, but I'm not sure what that blue 7-8 is. So could you clarify that?
Wendy, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Dan.
Maybe if you could zoom out a little bit on, or pull up the entire map, if you're not able to. Okay, great. So right now, the existing Dollar Mountain Trail, which you see in red with little bits of orange, that is to mountain bikers and hikers and trail runners. The idea here, as we move forward and develop this trail system in phase one, is to build the trail that you see, which will make a loop, the existing Dollar Mountain Trail. That trail will open to hikers and bikers. It will be a two-way, along with tealish blue trail that connects to Highland. That will be two-way, multiple-use trail. In phase two, which we're not talking about right now, but the blue trail that you see will be a downhill mountain bike only trail. And when that trail is built, the Dollar Mountain Trail will become an uphill only mountain bike and a two-way hiker trail. That way, mountain bikers going very slow on the existing Dollar Mountain Trail because they'll only be going, and that'll allow hikers to have a nice trail that they won't have zooming down on, and it'll give mountain bikers a trail that they can zoom down on, which will be that blue mountain bike only trail. But in phase one, what we're looking at maximizing colors by creating multiple use trails that you can go up and down.
So
That ain't,
I'm still not sure about the red one. So you're saying that right now, that red one will also be an up and down trail for bicycles?
it already is currently
Okay.
a two-way trail, but what we're working towards is creating that as a trail that would be mountain bike uphill only, and then two-way trail.
Well, I'm just going to say from a hiker's perspective is, and it may be that way now, but if it's going to be advertised as a mountain biking place, I think it's very important that for those of us who are hikers, which is a large number of people as well, that we don't have to be and feel endangered. So it was my understanding they were going to make that an uphill only as soon as they put in the green loop, which gives the mountain bikers a place to go down. And they could only walk their bikes to the top of the hill. I think that's pretty important myself.
I think you could do that early. The problem with it is that there's just not a lot of mileage yet in the trail system, but I think you could definitely do that now. And I'm hoping that with John Paul's assistance that the city can get grants and to be able to build blue and pink trail relatively quickly. Then you'd have a system. But I do understand what you're saying.
Okay.
And I think you could do that right away as build the green trail if need be.
The green trail is part of phase one, correct?
Correct. And it will be the more fun trail for most people to go up and down. But again, you're going to be putting a lot of bikers on that trail on the descent until you build that.
And I'm assuming that the yellow trails that we see are future trails? Am I correct?
Correct. That's the rest of the trail system as envisioned, including a nice short loop that comes out of this. And then, of course, all of the trails that stack loop system allows people to hike and trail run and hike in a number of ways so that you can ride, hike, or run this in so many different configurations to create a really nice trail system.
Okay, thank you.
Vanessa, then
Sorry.
Vanessa.
Has Dollar Mountain been yet adopted into the park system for the city?
Not officially.
Is it unique for the city to be using so many resources into a park that has not yet been adopted into the park system?
I can't answer that question. Perhaps Aaron or...
It's a good question. I think we would have to do some looking as to whether or not that's unique. You know, the fact that it is within the city's assets. You know, it's so we own it. Certainly allows us to do programming and, you know, be able to commit funds. You know, the formal process of getting Dollar Mountain actually added into the master parks plan is not a difficult one. I think it's largely been, you know, just hasn't. It's a public hearing before the Planning Commission and a public hearing before the City Council, and one that we have on our radar screen to come to you fairly soon.
Thank you.
You bet.
Brian?
I have a question on the specifications of the new trails. Since they're going to be shared and two-way, do we have like a specified width for those trails?
So we'll be using, I recommend using the International Association guidelines that have trail specs for shared use trails as well as trails.
Can I get a little more clarification?
Yeah, so trails typically are about 2 feet in width, and trails that shared use would probably be about 3 feet in width.
I heard 3 both directions. Can you clarify?
Yeah, you didn't totally come through clear on that one.
Oh, sorry. So a typical single use or single track trail is 2 feet in width. Now that will change. If it's a descent only trail, it may be a little bit wider, like that blue trail that has the number 7 point on it. The shared use trails will be aimed at about 3 feet, so that added width will allow for passing.
Okay, and
And
then.
Go ahead.
I just had a question for Aaron. Do we, the funds that are allocated from River Road Reserve on this line item, we don't have those yet, correct?
We do have the funds from River Road Reserve that were closed a couple weeks ago.
All right, thanks.
Okay, I don't know if I was just going to add that I do know that the tourism aspect and the DMO is in support of this, and that's why I asked about the lodging tax money, just simply because I know that is something that they are planning and hoping to market this area. So I do know that that is something that they are in favor of seeing us move forward with.
Rob?
I'm sorry.
So it's not a question for Wendy. It's more of a rhetorical is not the right word, but theoretical question, I guess, for Aaron and for the council. If in the unlikely event, I hope it's an unlikely event, that the levy were to fail in May, I realize these in some ways they're not really dedicated funds, or maybe some of them are, but I'm just wondering if the levy were to fail, is there something that our city would rather use these funds on than a mountain biking trail at this time? And I guess that question would be for Aaron. What percentage of these are actually specifically dedicated to this project?
The transit room tax dollars on the slide that she showed, the $100,000 would be something that's dedicated just for that and couldn't be utilized to help subsidize, say, a gap in lack of funding for public safety. The $450,000 for River Road Reserve, that does have flexibility in it because it is truly general fund, and that could be allocated however council desired.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think that probably everyone who's ever heard of this project thinks it's a great project. I mean, I don't think there's going to be any argument, or not too much argument, only in the details. The details are important, but I think the generalities are that we all like it. The question would be, is this money that we might potentially want to bank, so to speak, until we're sure that the public safety levy passes?
Rick?
So Wendy, if you go back to the slide with the dollar amounts on it, indicating the $485,000 from the general fund. I think when we were in goal setting, we were looking at the residue that was left over from last year. In the previous slide, you're showing anywhere from 90 to 150,000. I'm wondering if it would be helpful to see a spreadsheet going through the financial history, going back 2 years, showing that leftover amount, then moving in, showing the different potential projects, showing grant funding that's potential, and showing things like that, because what concerns me is we're showing $485,000 from the general fund, and with the projects that we have shown here as proposed, I'm not sure exactly why that needs to be shown in here at this time, and it's sort of reflecting what Rob is saying.
Yeah, if that's something you'd like, we can get that information right now for you. That's just a chart that's currently in the capital budget under the LB project. You can take a look at the last couple of years and where that money's coming from and what the money consists of. Adam, as I'm talking now, can maybe pull that up and give, or maybe he already has it pulled up, and he can highlight the remaining dollars, because there you're seeing $585,000, although we have 667. So where's the extra 120 or $30,000, and what is that? Is that allocated in transient room tax dollars or general fund? So we can break that down for you right now, or when Adam's available, he'll come up, and I guess I can stop stalling, and he can provide you that information.
Thank you.
So the information that I'm looking at is from our detailed capital budget document. What that has is an estimation of what happened in 2020 and not exactly what did happen in 2020. So this is not quite perfectly up to date, but the other revenue sources for this project were some other general fund discretionary dollars. There was also another $100,000 of lodging tax revenues from FY20, and then this additional $100,000 is for FY21. So there'd be a total of $200,000 of lodging tax resources in this project, if that adds.
So I think that might answer the question, meaning of the 667, $200,000 is transient room tax dollars, which does not have the general fund flexibility that we were talking about with Councilor Pell's question.
Valerie?
How about the parking lot? Was that taken originally out of that $100,000, and then we will be reimbursed with a chunk of that once the grant comes through? Am I correct?
Yeah, we
Grant
won't
you.
need to utilize that 80-some thousand dollars of transit room tax dollars because we're getting a grant for that.
Right,
So
but that has been set aside it has been set aside for the parking lot for a while. Am I correct? Was that part of the original?
I think that's part of the dollars that you're looking at right
It
now
is,
that you
okay,
can
that's what I wasn't
allocate
sure whether
for
that's
the
right.
trail
Because
system.
And I agree, Rob, I really do agree. I think all of us are hesitant to race forward and do anything with road reserve funds. I mean, I am, totally, and that's why I think they're coming back with simply a phase one, because one of the things we talked about, and I will say that to know this, that we received the grant after we bought the property. We received the $450,000 in Firewise funding from the Forestry Department because we purchased the land. So far we have gotten almost $500,000 in grants because we've taken a step. I think that if we want more grants, we need to take another step. And I think that by just going with phase one and showing that we do have a commitment and the money has been set aside with our lodging tax, which is for things like this, the infrastructure that will help our touristy, I think this is a wise move to bring forward more grants in the future. So that is why I would like to see us go through and go forward with a phase one, is because I recognize that there is other funding available through the state. They have this trails funding process, and if you are in the process of doing something, they're much more willing to give money to support it than if you just have it sitting in the back burner. So that is why, and because I do know that we have had money in the past, and I don't really want to spend that general fund transfer money, but I do know there is money available that can be utilized. That is not part of that.
DJ has a comment on the phone. DJ?
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to speak in favor of this. The vast majority of constituent feedback that I've received has been in favor of doing this. It's a familiar project. I've seen this before. I've been in favor of it a long time. Valerie, thank you for bringing up that point about the grant monies that we've received because of our calculated motions forward. I look forward to allocating this money to phase one, Dollar Mountain, and look forward to more calculated improvements in the future. That's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. Vanessa?
I also appreciate your comment, Councilor Lovelace. However, with LB 6370, I'm showing through the total project, it's estimated that we will spend $2.7 million. So although we are receiving grants and funds, we're having to spend a significant amount of money to receive that. And I would agree with Councillor Pell that we should use this potentially as an emergency lever until we know the future of our public safety levy. It kind of goes back to the needs versus, the nice to have. So I would prefer to shelve this until we know the future of the levy.
Brian?
I just wanted to follow up with Rick's comment about the detailed spreadsheet info for this. And I appreciate you sharing what you had, Adam, but I think once that's updated with all the current info, if it's possible for us to get that just for review, I think that would be helpful for me. And I don't know if other councilors need to voice, to have that happen or not, but it would sure be helpful for me.
I do believe, I'm hearing a number of good things from council through the discussion. I do believe, I want to make sure Adam corrects me if I'm wrong, we have the allocated resources that are designated for this type of project through lodging taxes to accommodate the project for the phase one without having to address the general fund potential reallocation. So you still could do, if council desires, the project without touching any general fund dollars. And that would not affect your response to a potential issue with public safety funding in the future.
Vanessa?
I'll be the one to confront the elephant in the room. When I was campaigning in 2020, this was the #1 thing I heard from people in conjunction with the public safety levy. So although the funds are allocated and they are separate, I think the public perception of this is very bad and the timing is not right.
Valerie?
Well, I'm going to support DJ on this one because you're right. I have heard people concerned about us spending money on Dollar Mountain. We've all heard the $1 million mountain. But I think economically you have to understand that we are at a turning point in our community, and bringing in people for the quality of life is what brings people to Grants Pass. You can go anywhere and you can find people who have moved here for the quality of Grants Pass. I have worked with and talked to many people in business out here and how we have such a hard time recruiting and keeping younger people in our community. And part of the reason is because we don't put the infrastructure in for parks and for things in our downtown, and to be able to have a hiking place right in our backyard, have them to be able to come into town, sit down at our many breweries and restaurants is selling. And I do know that there's people who are hesitant about spending this money, but you just have to, the money in tourism cannot be spent on public safety. So the money is there, it's allocated for this, and I think you just have to educate people. And I think in our economic times, as we are moving forward, it's really imperative that we look long range and not just short range. And I think a lot of the younger people, I will say particularly, are really looking forward to this. And I think that's just what we have to sell. We have to let them know this is funds that we cannot use for public safety. We can use Dollar Mountain funds, and I have proposed using those funds to help pay off our building, because those can be used, but they cannot be used for the operations of public safety. They have to be used in the industry having to do with tourism. So as long as the money is there, I think that you would be doing a disservice to our community by not promoting and building something that in a long range will keep workers here and will keep the quality of life that we all enjoy.
Rick?
There's a lot of issues here, and I guess I'm in support of Dollar Mountain, but I'm also want to make the statement, and I agree with basically what everybody's been saying in different aspects. I think when we went into this, because of what's in the phase one, I think we were told initially there was enough money there to complete Phase 1 with what money was already left over. And if we use an additional $100,000 from the lodging tax because it has to go for tourism-related items, I think we have ourselves covered for 2021, 2022. Not saying going forward, as Vanessa says, a long-term project, it's going to involve more money. And it bothers me to see the $485,000 designated there. And I realize we can put it there, but we also have the prerogative to take it out of there at the moment. And if we take that $485,000 out of there and just put it back into the general fund, I would be supportive of moving forward for 2021 or 22, whatever this Phase 1 takes to accomplish. But to me, it's also by showing that amount on here and showing that amount on here, I think it's a negative going into the levy. So, thank you.
All right, in the interest of time here, we had allotted 30 minutes for this and we add almost 40. Do we have questions for Wendy? No. Where do we want to go with it from here? You don't need to decide at this moment.
I would just say at this point, it sounds like that people asked for more details. They said, take that $485,000 out of there, show us the money that we have right now on paper in there, and let it be known that we do not intend to spend money from Rogue River Reserve, but only money from lodging tax transfer to make it happen. So if we could show that, maybe it would be something to be talked about at a later date.
Rick?
And I like what Valerie says, and I think it would be helpful to us to have the complete picture showing the grants that have come in and whether I realize they may be pending right now, they're not fully approved, and just showing that whole picture with the grants, and it just could be a memo to us as well. It doesn't.
I think that would be a good idea. Do we agree we'd like a memo with a full accounting of what grants and different assets are involved? I'm seeing all hands and nods. All right, let's go forward with getting a memo with the full accounting of the accounts related to Dollar Mountain project. Thank you, Wendy. We will move on to UGB rezone. Do you need affordable housing? Do you have affordable housing? Just while Brad's setting up there, we have 40 minutes, it looks like, slated for this presentation and discussion.
Good afternoon. Brad Clark with Community Development. We did submit a memo on this topic to you last week, and I've got a few highlights of that, and then just a couple of other maps that maybe will clarify where we're at, particularly for the council members that have that are new. So the purpose here is to provide you an update on the urban growth boundary rezone, and then to discuss potential next steps to comply with the transportation planning rule, which is the rule in the Oregon revised statutes that Oregon Department of Transportation has submitted to us with some concerns. The relationship to the council goal is to facilitate sustainable, manageable growth by increasing the supply of urban zone land for development. So in 2014, we did expand our urban growth boundary to its current location, and that land was added to the urban growth boundary. It had both city zoning already. Some of it was city zoning, and then urban, and then rural zoning. So that in 2020, the Parks and Community Development Department filed an application to rezone all of that property that was Josephine County zoning and make it City of Grants Pass zoning. So that's the application that is active and has had a public hearing before the Planning Commission. And there's really sort of two very broad goals to that application. One is to just increase the land available for development. I say just increase, but that's an incredibly important piece to our housing affordability issue. And then to implement community priorities and vision for the urban growth boundary areas, which until it has city zoning, whether that's commercial zoning or industrial zoning or residential zoning, that vision in the comprehensive plan really can't materialize. The zoning is really kind of what allows for that to happen. So this is just kind of the broad brush on the long-range planning process, the 2014 urban growth boundary adoption. There were several utility plans that Public Works, that Jason's crew worked on between 2014 and 2020, water, sewer, stormwater, and then as you know, last year the transportation system plan was kind of the last big piece to that. This showed eventually, so our target was to have the zoning adoption then in 2020. We're a bit delayed now, and then ultimately annexation. So the zoning factors that are looked at in terms of rezoning land are shown here. And the first one I bolded mainly because that's the main point of today's discussion. What is the availability of transportation and utility services to serve future development? And we have a number of others there that are required to be looked at, but the one I just wanted to focus on today is that first one. So this table just shows what the comp plan designations are, the long-range planning designations, and then what the zones are that the city already has in its development code that can be used. So there's, other than moderate high density, which just has the one zone, all of them have a couple of different options. And so this project basically went through and looked to see, okay, well, what is the most appropriate zone that the city has that could be applied to these parcels, about 540 acres. So this is what is really the crux of this application is putting these city zones on specific pieces of property. Here are the 5 sub areas that we're looking at. We have the North A and North B, and then we have 4 other areas down on the south part.
For them easier to see.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So the areas in the north there, A and B, are really not terribly pertinent because the transportation system there, mainly being Highland Avenue, and then use of the interchange are really pretty well. The capacity is there. The interchange is close by for I-5. The roadways are not expected to reach any kind of level of service that would push us to like a D or an E or an F level of service. So we are expecting to be able to move forward on those. The concerns that Oregon Department of Transportation has raised are really in the other 4 areas that are the west, the southwest AB, southwest C, and southeast. So, as I mentioned, part of the rezoning criteria that the city has to look at involves transportation. The statewide goals is one of the items that we also need to look at, and that's from ORS 197. And goal 12 for the statewide planning goals involves transportation. And that refers to a administrative rule that basically says if you as a city are going to rezone, if you're going to rezone property, you have to look at what the impacts of that rezone are on the transportation system. And specifically, at the bottom of this slide, whether a significant effect exists or will exist at the end of the 20-year planning period. So that's from OAR 660-12-0060, and that's at the heart of what ODOT is pointing to and saying that the city application currently does not really meet. We made the assumption that the transportation system plan that we adopted, which analyzed the entire urban growth boundary, was going to be sufficient. Its current data, it looked at the whole system. The argument here is that if you look and drill down on that language in the OAR, it doesn't really meet that full intent. And so they also saying, have you accounted for the reasonable worst case scenario? And that is what the TSP really does. It takes the highest level of traffic that could happen in, say, a high density zone, what would be the most trips that you would see generated out of that zone, and we build the TSP on that assumption. But it doesn't get to the point of actually saying, okay, on this parcel, here's the level of traffic that you could see, and here's the trip distribution that would happen as a result of that. So we're basically at a point where the public hearing for this rezone is been opened at the Planning Commission. We received the letter from ODOT. At this point, we have had several conversations with them, and staff's position is that we need to comply, obviously, with this OAR, and in order to do that, the preferred option would probably be this number one, and that is to go ahead and complete a transportation impact analysis. I'll show you a couple other options, and the council may have others, and we'll talk about those as well. But for this first one, it would allow the city to proceed with the full rezone area, all 5 of those sub-areas that I showed a minute ago. It would require us to hire a firm. At this point, we have only talked with David Evans and Associates because they are the ones who did the TSP for the city just last year. They are the ones who have the most recent data and have a lot of familiarity with Grants Pass, and would be able to step up pretty quickly and accomplish this quicker than what another firm might be able to do. They have come back and said their low cost estimate is $25,500. Their high cost is $36,500. It would involve scoping this with ODOT so that they are comfortable with what the study involves and it fully complies with what the state planning rule says. And then there would be a subsequent contract with the city to do that. We have looked at LB 6085, which under community development is the code and plan updates for the urban growth boundary expansion. As of today, there's a $23,000 balance in that LB project. There are also some surplus funds in the operating budget, not a capital budget, that are due to our unfilled positions that we have that would make up that $13,000 difference or so in order to get to the high end. So another alternative for council to consider is to phase this rezone rather than do the entire 540 acres. As I mentioned, the north sub-area is expected to comply. That could probably go ahead and proceed. But we do have the other 4 areas that would require TIAs. Those, are expected to be much less money. They could be done quicker if we just broke those down. One of the areas that I think we talked about in November was Allen Creek, which, as the council knows, has gotten a lot of discussion from potential developers who have some acreage there. And there's already sewer in Allen Creek. There has been quite a bit of work done on the widening of Allen Creek, so it seems to kind of, rise up as a logical area to phase. But, we can look at others. The whole challenge with this one is completing the prioritization to really make sure that if the city is going to do the rezoning and not just wait for developers to rezone the property on their own, that we have good justification and reasons as to why we're selecting certain sub-areas over another one. Another alternative would be to just withdraw the rezone entirely, not spend any more money, not spend any more time, and essentially just use the work that's done to date as kind of a reference tool. So if you are a developer, you could look at this work that the city's done and see what we've thought would probably be the most ideal zoning. It would really just be more of a reference tool, but it does provide some basis. A TIA would still need to be done in order to rezone the property, but that would be paid for at the time of a development and not paid for by the city now ahead of time. So the call to action, cost implications on the high end would be up to that $36,500. The action date is at your discretion, although due to the open public hearing that we have, preferred direction at today's workshop just so we can proceed and keep it moving. And then the alternatives that I've already mentioned are there. So that's all I have, unless you have other questions.
Questions? Rick and then Valerie.
Thank you, Brad. So on option one, if we were to spend that amount, they would go ahead and they would do additional TIAs on all those areas. And then that would be submitted to ODOT for their approval. So if you go through the entire process, which may include going through the Planning Commission again, coming back to City Council, going through ODOT, from start to end, what sort of timeline are we looking at? And again, I realize you have hearing dates and you have lead times and so forth. And I'm looking for a ballpark, not something, if everything works perfectly, it's here, but it never does. So,
Right.
What would you expect?
Yeah, I had that conversation with the consultants. Again, the advantage to DEA is that they have a lot of this. Well, I have all of the data for the TSP at their fingertips, so they can use a lot of that. They would clearly have to still do some more analysis, probably that 3 to 4 month range, if they were to once they get the go ahead to just complete the TIA on that whole thing, and then at that point we'd have to go, as you mentioned, back to the Planning Commission for their continued public hearing, probably another month, and then to the council after that. So, in an ideal scenario, you're looking at about 6 months.
Valerie.
Yes, I did read that piece this morning from ODOT about, and it was having the TIA, but on top of that was the second phase of it, and that was the city having set aside the money to make those, address those impacts. So my question is I know, and one of the things they talked about is that, the money hasn't been allocated from anywhere, but there is money right now allocated for Allen Creek. That has gone through the MRMPO process. We know there are developers out there willing to spend money and to move forward with it. We know money's been, put forward through the MRMPO to make it happen. So is it possible to, as they go through, start with that one and release that one before they go through all of them? Is that a possibility? Because to me, that seems like the most logical. That one has made some movement. That one has the money behind it from ODOT as well as the city. That one makes sense and can happen now. And I will say, if the builders that I have talked with out there, one of the biggest things that we have holding us back right now is lack of land. So we need to get it out there now. So I would really like to see us move forward and get all of them done, but prioritize Allen Creek and get that one done as quick as possible, and then have them follow through on the other two. Would that cost more money, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it would cost more money in that we would still, in order to comply with the transportation planning rule, have to have the mitigation study done and identify funding to address transportation projects that come out of that transportation study. So whether we do it just on Allen Creek or do it on the full, my understanding from the consultant is that it's, I mean, if you do the full, it's all gonna be done at the same time. If we just pulled out Allen Creek, then that would mean refiling the rezone application, because right now it's specific to the entire urban growth boundary. And I mean, so I guess to answer your question, yes, it would still involve, the spending of funds if the city is going to complete the rezone itself.
Okay, so let me see if what I hear is what you're saying. So you're saying that to do it all in one chunk would be the least expensive from the city because they'd be doing all of those things at the same time.
Right.
And so you're saying the time frame for that would be a minimum of 6 months.
Right.
Right. So, and that would be the $25,000 to $36,000, as opposed to if we were just to take on one at this point, because we already have, in a sense, the money allocated from the city and the ODOT, and everybody has already put in place those funds. That would, if we were to just choose one of them and choose Allen Creek, how long do you think that would take? Let's put it out there that way.
It's not going to save a lot of time, I think, picking 1 or 2 sections versus all of them. The same process still needs to be in place. So the only time savings you're going to get is by a little bit of data crunching with the different sections, but the process is still the same. So really, the return on your investment, that economy of scale is for sure doing the whole thing.
Okay.
I don't see us really being able to get much quicker by just picking one. We still have to go through the process of gathering the data from David Evans or whoever the contractor may be and going through the public process. The one thing I do want to note, though, for those, and I'm sure you know, Council, but just from the people that may be listening to this or watching, these properties, say in Allen Creek or all the other UGB areas, can annex, can rezone, and can move forward right now as of tomorrow. This is not hindering their development that we have not done this. What City Council has been trying to do is to do something that's very unique that not a lot of cities, or very few, if any cities, have ever done in the state of Oregon, and that is try to get the traffic impact analysis done on all urban growth boundary areas to where a developer doesn't have to pay for a traffic impact analysis. It's already done for them. So this is above and beyond what communities do. And that's an incentive to help us with, it's just another incentive for providing for more inventory for affordable housing or whatever type of housing. This does not inhibit at all a property owner to develop their property right now. This is just above and beyond, us going above and beyond, and actually having a out of the box, as Councilor Riker likes to say, idea to try and make it easier for developers.
The difference is that they would have to pay for the traffic impact study. So if at this point in time they wanted to develop their land, they need to put forth the money for the traffic impact. So it's a cost. It's just a cost that adds to the cost of the housing.
And as of today, that's the way it's been
right
through history. And so what we're trying is something different to try.
There was something in the report that talked about something Medford does something a little bit different. They do an urban, I didn't understand exactly what it was, but it was just a different way that cities do their, bringing people. Do you know anything about that, Mark?
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about is Medford did something that has only, I think, been done one other time in history, and that's do what's called regional problem solving. And so the cities are all, most of the cities of the Medford part of the Rogue Valley are all parties to a regional problem solving agreement, where rather than having population growth needs per city, they did it regionally, and then the cities agreed on the total number and then the allocation to each city. And so urban growth boundary amendments and rezones have to be done pursuant to the regional problem-solving agreement. So there is a regional collaborative approach that made sense, well, arguably made sense there. It was a very, 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 very long process. But Grants Pass is far more of a standalone community as far as you don't have other incorporated cities nearby.
Okay,
So I
thank you.
think that's probably
I
what
think it
you're
was.
getting at.
I do remember the word regional in there, and it just fascinated
Yeah.
me because I had never seen that done. I had never heard of that before. So in this case, under the circumstances of kind of understanding transportation and how it works and what works, it sounds to me like it would be cost effective to do all of them at one time. And then because the money has been allotted for the Allen Creek, that will probably be the first one off, just because I'm saying they're getting money to go through that whole MRMPO process takes a while. So it sounds to me like that is a part of this process as well. So thank you for that information. So I do understand a little bit and understand this would probably be the most cost effective.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. So on the surface, this looks like it's a really good deal for developers because we're kind of doing some of the lifting for them and making it a little bit easier for them. And I know just enough about this to probably be dangerous, so if my question's off base, please tell me. But I'm just wondering what effect doing this rezone would have to exacerbate urban sprawl and the issue of urban sprawl. And in addition, would it motivate developers to not pursue infill projects as much, urban infill?
So one of the drivers to Oregon's urban growth boundary laws is to counteract, the effects of sprawl. So by definition, just the fact that you have a defined area that is limited to a 20-year supply of land, one could argue, that in and of itself is a mechanism to prevent sprawl because you're unable to just continue going and going with urban type development. It's already contained. We're not talking about changing that boundary. We're just talking about rezoning land that's already in the boundary to be able to develop it to an urban density. The second part of your question, I'm sorry.
Oh, would it reduce motivation to do urban infill?
Right. I mean, in my opinion, it wouldn't. There's property that's there. The infrastructure costs are going to be more expensive typically if you're going to choose to go onto the fringe, and you're going to have to extend those services versus the infill, which much of the time, that the infrastructure is already there. So the rezoning process itself doesn't build the infrastructure for the developers. Unlike an infill where most of that's already there. So I mean, I think you sort of can have both going on at the same time.
I see. Thank you. And then just as a follow-up, I saw on the maps that were sent out, the proposed rezone. Are those zonings have already been determined for that? The different categories for the different properties?
Well, that's what the application that's currently active is proposing to do, is to apply, those city zones, which are listed here on the slide, to these 5 areas. So, for example, if it's low density residential, you can choose from those 3 zones, R112, R110, R18, without changing the comprehensive plan. Those are the only 3. But we haven't formalized which one of those 3. It's
in a sense zoned, and I use that term very, very loosely because the comp plan is not a zoning designation, but it's got a comp plan designation which is closely related to zoning. And so you could have, in a general sense, a commercial comp plan designation. From there, you could have any sort of commercial zoning. And so the types of zoning that could be implemented is already somewhat preordained due to the existing comp plan designations.
Sure, and I think the motivation for that question is specifically with regards to the residential zoning. I just want to make sure that we are erring on the side of higher density zoning, given our housing issue. So I don't know if that's something that comes through staff, or if council needs to provide direction on that, or if it's already preordained or what.
Sure, and the application the staff report that was submitted to the Planning Commission for their October public hearing did make that sort of assumption that that is really the direction, and then that could be pulled back. But it really, not in all cases, but in most cases, it did presume that that higher density zone would be in place. Yeah.
Further questions? Vanessa?
When did you say that staff report was, that you just mentioned?
That was October 28th.
Okay, of 2020?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And this isn't a question for you, Brad. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to see from this council minimum densities discussed before this rezone project is completed. Along with Councilor Dilly-Grange, I have concerns that status quo would continue, that low density development would occur on high density property.
Valerie?
I think everybody would like to see that, and I think that's been the push all along, as we understand, we're all understanding of the crisis that we have. I think that's been the movement, and part of the reason that I know that I've prioritized, in a sense, Allen Creek, because I do know that that's been a discussion. And yeah, we need to have that, but I think in order to do anything, we have to move forward with this, because nothing is going to happen until this is done, and we need to get this done now, so that we can move forward. So this is what's going to allow us to have that. And so if we don't move forward with this, we're going to be just running in place, which we've been doing for years because of ODOT and all of the zoning and all of the things that go along with it. So to me, it's really important that we do this in order to do that, if that makes sense. And I agree with you.
DJ's on the phone with a comment.
Yeah, I got a couple comments about being concerned about the infill. I know that the council decided not to do an urban growth expansion when it was time to try to encourage infill. It's my opinion that that has encouraged a housing crisis here. In regards to the comments about not wanting to rezone until we have some minimum density in place, that's holding hostage. That's appropriate. The Housing Advisory Committee has a minimum density requirement. I think that they're narrowing down on what the proposal should be to council, and I think we're all looking forward to that. But the fact of the matter is we are so desperately far behind available land for development that it's anything that we can do to encourage that, including this outside of the box thinking that the city's doing to try to rezone own land to encourage development. I'd be hard pressed to think negatively about this moment. I'm absolutely in favor of doing the complete traffic input analysis for all 540 acres. It being seemingly the best way for the money and the time to get land available. I think this is one of the most important decisions that we're facing right now in regards to development and responding to the housing crisis. So just to be clear, that's option one, the complete TIA is what I'm in favor of. Thank you.
Rob?
I think I understand what DJ just said. I have to question, though, he almost made it sound as if any development is being held hostage before we can pass this plan in its entirety. And we just heard a few minutes ago, I think from Aaron, that any development can still go forward. It's just a question of who's going to pay for this study. So I understand that DJ and others in that industry would prefer if the city paid for it. That's understandable. They'd like to be subsidized. But I also didn't hear anything today that told me that development right now is being held back by this because any developer who wants to can still move forward, if I understood that correctly. Is that right, Brad? They just have to pay for it themselves.
No, yeah, that is correct.
Thank you.
In addition to Councilor Lovelace's point about the cost of the study, you know, there's also the rezone application itself. So a developer would also have to file a rezone application and go through that, you know, 4 to 5 month process to rezone the property before they could do a development. So I just wanted to clarify that's in addition.
So, and thank you for that. And I guess there's, the way I hear this is 2 really good points. I mean, one is, I guess, efficiency and makes it a little bit smoother and easier for the developers, and therefore we might get some projects built. The question is, what kind of projects are they likely to build if we don't know and we're not giving clear direction as to the density? So it's not a question of giving a developer a green light and saying, we trust you, you're going to build what we think the city needs. No, they're going to build what they can make the most money on right now. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with making money. But by the same token, it's the council's job to give direction as to, especially since we're in basically an existential threat situation with no housing. I'd like to just very briefly tell a story. Really, I just in the last couple of days have been more fully educated on this problem. It had been about 3 years since I had needed a tenant in any of my properties, and I advertised on Friday, and within about 5 hours I had 14 phone calls and 7 or 8 emails of people who are just desperate for a place to live. And a few years ago, while it was easy to find a tenant, right now the tenants really have a really, really bad situation. And there's some really, you know, listen to their stories, whether it's being burned out in the fire, whether it's having to live in a motel with their family for $600 a week. The crisis is actually, went beyond what I imagined. So to Vanessa's point of trying to have an assurance that the zoning and the densities are going to be what the city actually needs in the next 5 to 20 years, as opposed to what developers can make the most profit on today, there needs to be a coming together of those 2 forces. So I also would like to have more input and more guarantee as to what the densities are going to be once we actually pay for these impact studies.
Rick and then Brian.
So I just want to say that I also endorse the comments made by DJ, but also Brad, if we go forward with having these people do the TIA, they would do the worst case scenario with full density, or what parameters do they have when they do that study?
That's I think that's the most likely to happen. We would, through the conversations with ODOT Region 3 staff, that scoping would get more refined, so that we are for sure developing a study that we know ODOT is saying, yeah, this is, but the language in the statute would lead you to believe, yes, it's going to be the worst case scenario. So you would, if 30 units per acre is what the zoning says is the max, you know, that's what the study would likely look at, unless there's wetlands or, you know, some other barriers to development.
I guess I would want to somehow express that concern to them that they do a full density type study, and I think that would help address Vanessa's concern that these areas would have the potential to be developed to the full density. But also I hear Vanessa saying we as the council and maybe as the city need to consider, which we are, putting, I would say rules, but requirements that if you have a high density zone, that there is a significant number of usage to that density. So you don't take an R4 land and just put single-family dwellings on it. Thank you.
Let's see, it's Brian, and then Vanessa, and then Valerie.
Thank you. I noticed that the chair of the Housing Advisory Committee is in the audience, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not, Sarah, but I thought maybe we could ask him if he has any comments on this topic.
All right. Doug, do you have comments on the topic?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so sort of 3 points. It seems, first off, you're having maybe a little bit of a debate between whether to do the urban growth boundary zone and pay for that transportation plan versus require minimum densities or start to go down the path of talking about minimum densities at the council level. I think you can do both. I think the transportation plan, urban growth boundaries is in a ideal situation is going to be 6 months. So you can start that, I think, and then still get minimum densities overlaid on that. We at the Housing Advisory Committee are probably going to have our conversations finished with minimum densities and be bringing something to you in the very near future. I think we're pretty much done. Once staff has the last details to us, then we'll probably be able to come to a decision on 60%, 65%, or whatever it is we're going to do. So that's probably in the works, and I think they can both overlap each other fairly well. And so I would say don't let one sort of stop you from doing the other. I think they can both happen at the same time. And then the third point is the Housing Advisory Committee is going to be coming to you over the next year or so with a group of things, group of ideas, actions that we want you to incentivize, to put money at or to put resources towards. This one, the urban growth boundary zone, although it's an incentive to developers, like you pointed out, Rob, I agree with you completely. It's probably the biggest bang for the buck you're going to get out of all that list because of the number of acres and because of the fact that you're going to lighten the load on every single developer. If I develop 2 acres, I have to pay for a transportation study. Well, the person behind me that's going to develop the 2 acres behind that is going to pay for a study, and they almost overlap each other. So that money is almost, I don't know, a quarter of it's wasteful because it's just redundant, but every developer is going to have to pay for that. So this is probably one of the most efficient uses of your money when it comes to incentivizing building. I don't know if you got any other questions.
Thank you.
Vanessa, then Valerie.
I did want to clarify my statement. Sorry if I wasn't as clear as I should have been. I am in support with moving forward for option 1 and moving forward with hiring DEA to finalize the transportation study, but in that time that it's completed, I would like the council to move forward on minimum density discussion and making some serious progress on that. Personally, I don't think what ODOT is requesting is unreasonable. I live in the southwest area and traffic out there right now is awful. So I think that this is a reasonable request to accommodate.
Valerie?
Yes, I would agree with Vanessa as well, and I would also agree with Doug. The reality of it is the cost that we hear over and over and over again from builders, it's the costs that the city has that prevents things from penciling. They don't pencil out because they have to pay, and if they have to pay a transportation impact study on top of the SDCs that they have to pay, I mean, it's truly a burden, and it brings the prices of whatever you build up. So the whole purpose is to bring them down, and to bring them down, doing something like doing this transportation study, which I agree with Vanessa. When we put together our transportation plan, what we didn't do is we didn't look at the highest density, which is what we want, and that's what ODOT is saying. You put this together based upon what we have now, but if you truly develop these, which could happen because we keep hearing about all these people who want housing in Grants Pass. If we do that, then truly you are going to have headaches on your transportation that you should have looked forward ahead of time. So I also believe that it's reasonable. I also think that this is a huge step in bringing down the cost of housing in those areas, because what we also need to do is incentivize through SDCs, which is why we're trying to sell property, to build a pot, to bring the cost down. It's all about having money somehow available to cut the costs, and that is the only way we're going to be able to provide affordable housing in this community. And this isn't something that's just now taking effect. We have been working on it with the Housing Advisory, and I so look forward to getting those and getting finally some movement. So I think that the 6 months doing what ODA's asking us to do, working with the housing development and getting this zoning thing figured out will go a long way in keeping housing affordable as we move forward.
DJ has a question on the phone.
I do. Thank you for coming and talking to us. I agree with what you said. Particularly want to build on the comment about this is an efficient use of dollars that's going to subsidize development, because I think we've identified if we want to accelerate processing, get closer to our density goals, subsidies are a really good way to do it, and this is a very efficient use of funds. I have a question for Brett. Doug can elaborate a little bit. At what point in regards to minimum density would past densities be grandfathered in? I guess using more of an example, which helps me understand, is let's say we do this zoning effort. Can we retroactively apply minimum density requirements to those properties that were rezoned?
This is Brad. If I understand what you're saying, Counselor, if we proceed with this rezone application and apply the zones that are being looked at, are you saying, does that mean we can't also apply minimum densities down the road? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just to clarify, I was using this rezoning as just an example. We could think about a different example of just some chunk of land that was rezoned. Let's say it was rezoned, next week. And then after that rezoning, we implemented a minimum density. Would the city be able to retroactively apply a minimum density requirement to that land that was just rezoned prior to that?
So it's all triggered by the filing of an application to the city. If we rezone property, that doesn't mean that there's going to be a development. But if we rezone the property and they file a development application, at that point, minimum densities would not be able to apply. But if we rezone the property and we have put a minimum density in our code and then they apply, then they could be required to do minimum densities. Does that make sense?
Okay, very good. That answers my question exactly, and I think that's a really important point that we need to understand in regards to this conversation. And just very briefly, I want everybody to know that I'm not opposed to a calculated implementation of minimum density zonings. We just need to be very cautious, very thoughtful about implementation. So I'm looking forward to it. So that being said, I'm still in favor of the complete TIA. Also get what Doug mentioned, that 6-month timeline, and then what Brad mentioned about that triggers on development and not on the application of zoning. I think that's going to leave us some time for those density considerations, which I think we should still be talking about as a priority. So thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Good direction.
Thank you, Brad.
Good direction.
All right, what would you like to?
Before we move on, do we have any call to action coming out of this? I haven't heard anything from council on if you'd like us to do option 1 or one of the other options.
Thanks.
Option 1. And I think DJ just said option 1.
I'm seeing 3
Yeah,
hands.
I'm willing to
3 hands.
officiate that motion if needs be.
Seeing 4 hands, including DJ, for option 1. Oh, 5 with Rob. All right, we are canceling the urban campground presentation for today. We're going to hold off on having that while we gather some more information to have a more complete presentation in the future. So the first thing I think we should talk about during agenda review is what questions we want answered in our urban campground presentation. Rob.
I guess the situation, as I perceive it, is that this is an emerging field trying to turn the homeless epidemic into something positive for cities and towns all across the country. As far as, and because it's an emerging field, there are very few people that really have much knowledge or mastery of it. Back in the fall, I guess Brian Boteller spoke in front of the council for about an hour and a half, and he's got a certain amount of knowledge about one segment of dealing with, one way of dealing with homeless. Fortunately, just a few miles down the road, we have some people that are pretty well versed in the issue of homelessness, trying to give people a hand up, move them along. And I've spoken with them at length this weekend. I know that over in Medford, Chad McComas actually mentioned that he had recently had a group of police officers from Lebanon, Oregon, had looked at a shelter in a nearby city and were kind of horrified. And they came down to Medford and checked out their situation, and they literally dragged back their city council to take a look at what's going on over there. And I know I've encouraged members of our council and staff to go over there and take a look. Some of us did go in December. I don't think anyone's gone since, but there's a wealth of information over there. And I also have spoken with Lieutenant Kirkpatrick of Medford PD. Many people say that he was instrumental in creating the urban campground and also in the running of it. And I can say that in just a few minutes of talking with both Chad and Lieutenant Kirkpatrick, it's just amazing how many, not only questions pop into my mind, but also answers and suggestions, really positive suggestions. So fortunately, they are both very willing to come and speak with us in person. Lieutenant Kirkpatrick says that Mondays at 11:45 actually is a really good time for him. It's one of his best times of the week. And they are very happy about coming together and working together because they already do. Lieutenant Kirkpatrick said he'd be willing to, or happy to explain to us what he feels the benefits are of the urban campground, what the pitfalls are. And I know that people in Medford think extremely highly of his participation in that project. So he would be a person that would be willing to come here to a workshop at 11:45, as would Chad. And rather than me having to, basically what I guess Donald Rumsfeld's quote, you don't know what you don't know. So most of us in Grants Pass, I don't know anybody that's particularly knowledgeable on this subject, quite frankly. And I'd like for them to come here, and I'm sure that not only will they be answering a lot of our questions, but more importantly, the questions that we haven't even thought of yet. So I would like to invite them and them give us a presentation. And we can obviously email them any questions in the days prior to them getting here if we come up with anything. But they're the experts. I mean, we're just guessing, quite frankly. So I would like to see them both here together, and they're happy to, they both volunteer to do that.
Rick and then Valerie.
I would like to endorse what Rob says because I think it would be helpful if we had that type of information. Also, I didn't know if there's already something out on how Seattle and Portland have done with their campgrounds. And I know, as I've said before, I've toured with the LOC in Eugene and seen 3 of their campgrounds. And the last word I heard from them, at one point they were considering a 4th campground. But it was my understanding the city council did not support that idea, and I don't know the reason behind it. How easy it would be to get some clarification on that from them and see how their campgrounds are successful or not successful. And the pitfalls, I think, would be helpful. Again, I don't know how difficult that would be to gain that information, and I don't know if we, as counselors, can gather that information and present it to you, to staff, to be presented to all of us. I don't know if that would be helpful because some of this information can be very time-consuming, and I'm not intending to put an extra burden on staff. Thank you.
Valerie.
Yes, I would also like to have them come over because I do believe that they have a great, vast amount of knowledge. And one of the things I have heard that Medford did was somehow incentivize, so they actually, some of the campgrounds they have are a public-private partnership, so that private land was utilized for them, and somehow that was incentivized through some sort of tax abatement or something. And so that's what I'm interested in, is how, are there tax incentives or things that you can do to bring in properties that are privately owned who might be willing to come along with us in the process. So that's something I would like to see researched. I also, I talked with Joel King actually earlier today, and he had mentioned the fact that, he said, well, what about city property that we might have? And I don't know of any property that might be. I think it's important that there is some sort of, one of the things I've seen work is some sort of transit involved to make sure that the people can get to town or whatever. So those are the sorts of things that I want to know about, is what, how does it tie in with transit? How does it tie in with allowing them, to get into town with services? Because once again, the only successful ones I've heard about are ones that have services involved, much like Rogue Retreats has wraparound. So I would also like to see Kirkpatrick come over and maybe Chad, and then I would also like some information on the public-private partnerships and tax incentives that might be involved in that process.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I've heard some really great points brought up that I agree with wholeheartedly. And to speak to what Councilor Lovelace had said, the city negotiated fire mitigation services for the use of that land. So that was the deal between the private and public use of that land. I think it would even serve us to move the conditional use permit social services discussion prior to the urban campground so that it widens the scope of possibilities for land to be used. I did take a look at city surplus properties, and they are not zoned for use for this type of activity, so it may even serve us to move that around before we talk about the urban campground.
Valerie?
I would agree with that, because I think it doesn't matter what services at this point we provide, we're going to keep running into the same problem with the zoning. So I think that is the first thing that needs to be addressed. So I would agree that that needs to be brought sooner than later.
Okay, well, at this point, that discussion is scheduled for the 29th on the conditional use permit for social services, and I'm not sure I see this urban campground discussion happening prior to that. Mark, do you have any concerns about having Rogue Retreat be a presenter and then potentially being an applicant for offering this sort of service?
Well, I have some concerns, but the concerns that you're alluding to relate to ex parte contact, and those, the legal aspects of that, in my opinion, don't truly attach until an application is made. So if in the future Rogue Retreat is perhaps an applicant for an urban campground, then there could be some suspicion of bias by opponents depending on how the conversation goes with Rogue Retreat, but there's no technical ex parte legal violation if Rogue Retreat is coming in talking about an application, or I'm sorry, talking about the concept prior to any actual application. And so, considering Rogue Retreat may be one of the providers of something like this, I think it's somewhat unavoidable to have, if that's council's desire, to have a potential future applicant talking about this prior to any actual application.
Thank you.
So no real concerns, but it's something that could be raised in the future.
Okay. I think, does anybody else have anything to add, or you can come to me or Aaron after this? It's going to be a couple weeks before we get back to urban campground on the workshop. Is there anything else before we change topic here? Okay. Yes, Vanessa.
I know you had mentioned that the conditional use permit is scheduled for the 29th. Is it possible to move that forward to the 22nd or the 15th?
I don't think there's any sort of emergency personally, and we have a lot going on these different agendas. You know, this is 3 weeks from today.
I would argue that this is significantly more important than Xeriscape discussion on the 22nd.
I don't know, we have the property discussion set up for the same, actually, that's a different day, take it back. Well, I think, who would be presenting? Is that Brad? Is that possible to do the 29th? I mean, we're not, it's not going to matter.
It's up to council. I mean, we're just not, it's not a public hearing. That discussion on the 29th is, you know, just follow-up, adding more information before the council on the topic, so.
Yeah. I mean, Vanessa, I appreciate the timeline there, but there's actually no meeting. It's moving it by 1 week is not going to affect any sort of change, substantial change in getting anything accomplished sooner. So,
I understand that perception. The way that I'm looking at it is that it gets the ball rolling, it gets council talking about it, it gets council thinking about it, it gets staff prepared for potentially the next meeting. So I just think the sooner that we're able to address it, the sooner we are able to do something about it.
all right, does council want to move it forward from the 29th to the 22nd? Raise your hand if you do.
Yeah, actually,
Okay. If we move conditional use to the 22nd, then what do you want to take off?
actually, this is just from me. I do not really, that landscape, xeriscape, I mean, I've been on the council now for 5 years, and it's been on the council agenda for 5 years. So if you talk to the tree committee or any of those committees that have been dealing with this, they've been dealing with this for years. So this, I would rather see the wildfire hazard mitigation construction guide, and the reason I say that is I do think it's important, but I don't know that, you know, that is going to make that big a difference. I would rather see that moved personally. Or I'll throw out there one other thing, the DMO contract. Have we seen the DMO contract? Has the city put that together, Brad? Because I know the DMO has not seen it, and they would like to see it before it gets presented to council, and that has not been given to the DMO yet.
So we're still finalizing the DMO contract. I expect it to probably be done this week, and then we'd be able to get it out. So technically, it would be able to get out before the Monday workshop.
Okay, well, I want to make sure that because we have a meeting on Friday, and I know they would like to discuss it and analyze it before the Monday workshop. So what I'm saying is that at this point, we haven't seen it, they haven't seen it, to even look at it, to discuss it themselves before they come before the workshop. And I think that is something that they would like to do. So I don't know whether it's possible to bump that to the 22nd and then bump that up further. I'm just throwing out ideas.
I didn't follow where the DMO contract is at.
It's on the 15th, so
Yeah.
it's coming up.
And it's not ready yet, or?
Well, I'm saying, I mean, I don't know where Brad is on it, but I
It's
just
going
know.
to be ready early this week, probably no later than Wednesday. We've been
Is it
working on
okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so then they will have a chance. Okay, I don't want to push them off then, if that's the case.
Yeah. Brian?
I would be in favor of moving either the xeriscaping or the Redwood conveyance crossing to the 29th, just swapping it with a conditional use permit. I feel like the wildfire hazard topic is super timely since we're coming into spring, and I don't want to put that off at all.
Can I ask what that is? Because if it's.
You know, we're splitting hairs here. This
I
is
know.
a matter of talking about something 1 week versus the next. Okay, something that has no pressing deadline whatsoever, you know. I make the call that we leave things as they are. That's my call. This is a frustrating conversation. I mean, the DMO contract, now that actually, they're talking about hiring somebody and getting that done sooner than later if it's ready to go will affect something. Talking about, you know, the urban campground on one Monday versus the next Monday is not going to make it happen any faster, I'm sorry to say. So.
I
does
will
any-
support you and say that I'll support that.
All right, if you guys would like to move it to the 22nd, which you all did raise your hands, we have to find something to bump. Otherwise, we have to leave it as is. Yes, Vanessa?
I support Councilor DeLaGrange in just swapping either Xeriscape or the Redwood Conveyance Crossing with the conditional use permit discussion, just swapping them.
Okay, is there any,
So maybe to make it easier to limit the options for council, I believe the Redwood Conveyance Crossing does involve a consultant, which we have asked to move three times. So if council would have the flexibility, we'd prefer not for you to move the Redwood Conveyance because we've already scheduled with them 3 different times.
DJ?
Yeah, sure. I'm hearing everybody in the favor that they have to move something to have that a week earlier, and I would just like to encourage council to allow Sarah and I to handle that, gather more information in regards, and rest assured we'll address that at our next agenda setting meeting.
I agree.
Vanessa, then Brian?
I understand your statement, Councilor Fazer, but this body has already expressed a consensus in moving that discussion.
I would like to retract my consensus and just say that I'm just fine with leaving it as it is because I do think it is the mayor's and the council president's job to set the agenda.
Brian?
I was just going to say, it seems like we already narrowed it down to just the xeriscaping option. So we could very easily just move the xeriscaping and move the conditional use permit and be done with it.
Okay, does xeriscaping involve any consultants? All right, we'll flip that to the 29th. All right, does anybody have questions about items coming up on next Monday's workshop? We have the Visitor Center, Chamber of Commerce discussion, public restrooms, DMO contract. It's kind of a tourism restroom theme day. Brian?
Can I just ask about kind of the scope of that visitor center conversation and presentation? I'm not totally sure what the goal of that is.
So I'll have Brad fill in. Brad, you may want to listen for a second. My understanding is it's the Chamber of Commerce providing you with an update on statistics and data associated with their visitor center activities that have occurred, budget expenditures based on the $72,000 that you give annually. Brad, do you have any other direction that you've provided that Josie from the Chamber to provide? So if there's anything above and beyond what I just mentioned, please let us know and we'll make sure that it's also included in the presentation.
I mean, the scope of that sounds like a memo. It doesn't sound like there's any action or anything from what I heard. So, I don't know.
I will say that's not true because this is something that they've done every year. I do think this is something, we give $72,000 and they come and give a report on what they do. And I think with the ongoing discussion that we're going to have further with the visitor center, I think it is indeed important that we give Josie that opportunity to present.
Rick?
So would that further discussion in the future include the prospect and the detail of the remodel of the center, but not at this moment?
So that's a different location. That's the 6 and G that the city
Okay.
currently does. This one is specifically with regards to the contract that we have the chamber on the north end of town.
Okay, thank you.
All right, are there any questions about the March 17th meeting? We're scheduled to have a couple public hearings, one about the CDBG request for proposal about public services. I have a question, what is that?
So part of the Community Development Block Grant program, there's a 15% what they call public service cap. So it allows you, if you're a public service provider like a nonprofit agency, Hearts with a Mission, others, if you want to apply for some of that 15% money, then you need to be approved. And so those are 6 presentations to the council from local service providers, then for you as a council to hear those presentations and then rank them. And then the allocations of community development block grant money will be assigned based on those rankings.
Okay, and do those presentations, they have a time limit?
They do.
10 minutes?
They do. We
Okay.
set a time limit on those. I think it's very short. I think if you want us to give any more, I believe that those instructions have already been sent out. I don't think it's any more than 10.
Okay. And then we have a public hearing on scenic resources
That's a continuation of the public hearing that you had a couple of months ago.
Is a consultant going to be there for that? Because don't we have a consultant? Is that correct?
We did have a consultant prepare the study. We didn't ask them to attend.
Do you have an update of what because I know that we said before there were some things we were concerned about, and then I'm assuming they addressed them, because I would like to look at what their new proposal was, and I guess that will be in the packet. So the new proposal with the changes that the consultant made will be in the packet, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. And then we have to set to talk about Caveman Pool. Oh. The solid waste franchise rate increase with Republic as well as SOS. And on the consent calendar is a resolution about the B Street Sidewalk CMAQ project.
Congestion mitigation, air quality. Yes, I finally got it up. Yes, that is money that is coming, that's federal money for sidewalk projects.
Okay. And a Marine Board grant and the Rogue Area Drug Enforcement Grant. Questions? Seeing none? Okay. Anything that you want to add to a future agenda going forward? Vanessa?
Maybe this is out of place. This isn't to add, this is to question. On April 12th, will we still be having the airport funding request, even with the recent news of the FAA rejection of the airport expansion?
You know, that's a great question I have myself. I haven't had an opportunity to get in contact with Larry Graves or the Board of Commissioners, but that may be moot now, and it may just be taken off, but I haven't gotten confirmation yet.
Thank you.
Valerie?
Yeah, I'm just going to remind, I know this sounds really crazy, but a while back, I did ask for some input on what has been learned from the fire problems and the water problems they had with the fire system when the fires raced through. And I had mentioned to the city that I would love to get an update as to what has been learned from that, and whether, because there was a couple things. One of the things was the fact that the fire hydrants didn't work. There were issues with fire hydrants working. And so I just want to make sure that those things are in place for us as we move forward, and I preferably like to know whether, you know, that is something we need to address before this coming summer. And also there was issues with generators. So I just, you know, I've kind of kicked it down, let it go, but it was something that I was really interested in getting. So I just want to know where you are with that, Jason.
Yeah, I know that we've had a couple of conversations about that, and a lot of the issues, while there were a few generator issues, the amount of services that burned actually created essentially 100 main breaks or thousands of main breaks, and they just ran out of water. So most of this is actually being covered in our water infrastructure plan that we're creating right now, the risk and resiliency plan, and we'll be presenting that to you probably in early summer. And so if you would rather have a memo ahead of that, we can generate that. Otherwise, I would propose that we just wait and present that plan to you for adoption, and that's the required plan that we funded in this year's budget cycle.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted an update, because you know my husband's very, you know, concerned about it, and I know other people are too, and I'd like to make sure that we get it before fire season kicks in. So that's so I appreciate that you're doing that. One of the things, being an owner of buildings that have sprinkling systems, one of the problems that they had was that those sprinkling systems, once they start, never stop. And that was a big issue in the fires, is because that, a lot of water goes into that. And he said there's a way that you can go and flip them off. There's ways to turn them off if that happens. So just putting it out there.
Yep. Anything else for the good of the order? Rob?
I still don't see anything on our list about the training for the city manager evaluation. And I'm hoping to get that on a workshop sooner rather than later, meaning that...
We have these workshops, Rob, twice as often as Aaron and I meet for agenda review. So you mentioned it last week, and we haven't had a chance to talk about that yet. But we can get that going.
So then it's good to hear that you're taking it seriously and that you'll get it going.
DJ?
Yeah, there's just 2 items that I would like to see come out of the hopper and be put into future agenda. One item would be wayfinding and parking signage, looking into that to make them kind of more efficient. And the other one would be looking into our food truck municipal code. So basically, I'm asking council if they wouldn't mind pulling that out of the hopper and putting it into a future agenda.
What was your first item again? Wayfinding and parking?
Yeah, the parking signage and wayfinding signage. That was a high priority item that came out of the downtown parking task force recommendations, and it's something I would like to see worked on this year.
All right. Rob?
Yeah, I agree with what DJ's saying on that. It will be helpful for tourists, especially, to better utilize our CBD and actually the entire town if we can get the signage actually be functional and helpful.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Is that topic something that we can delegate to the parking task force and they can work through it and they can bring us a recommendation to save us some time possibly?
Rob's going to answer.
So on our parking task force final report, there's one section that's specifically about the wayfinding signage. So if you haven't already, I'm sure it's probably on the city website, or I can send you a copy of the sign report. But it was pretty clear.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else today? All right.
Yeah, the second item that I wanted to see perhaps taken out of the hopper would be the food truck municipal code. Just evaluating that and see if it's appropriate. I think that there's a couple items in there that are worth looking into.
Brian?
So I have a question about that because, as I understand it, there's a development up at the north end of town that is utilizing some food carts, and so is this something that is separate from how they got approval? I'm just not sure what the scope of this topic is exactly.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. My request for this is unrelated to that. I've taken a particular interest in food trucks in our community for years now, and this is just something that I've wanted to work on. There's 2 items, basically, alcohol restriction and requirements of security fences around food truck pods, amongst a couple other minor tweaks that I think would be appropriate to the code.
All right. Anything else today? All right. Entertain a motion to adjourn?
Oh, no.
Do we still have one topic?
AVS, affordable housing.
I was a little confused when you moved to the agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I thought you were up there to talk about urban campground questions. I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is a quick update on the AVS RFP relating to the council goals of cooperative shared leadership and facilitating sustainable and manageable growth. So to refresh, we issued an RFP in April 2020 seeking a qualified affordable housing provider to develop the Ramsey, Nebraska property, or the contract to AVS on September 8th. So currently negotiating a combination sale and development agreement with AVS. So the sale, how it would work is we'd enter into the development agreement, and that would provide a sale price for the property, and the sale would be contingent upon approval of the necessary entitlements to build a single 3-story building consisting of 66 units, 51 bedroom, 16 2-bedroom, 74 on-site parking spaces, 25,000 square feet of open space, on-site management, indoor activity, amenity space, and it would be a 55 and older community. And the most important portion here is that tenants cannot earn more than 60% of the area median income, and then rent cannot exceed 30% of area median income. Those income and rent restrictions would be enforced by a restrictive covenant, and that would run with the land, meaning no matter who the owner is of the property in the future, it's still enforceable against the current and all future owners. Sales price just short of $1.1 million. The total package would consist of 3 different documents. So there'd be a real estate purchase and sale agreement that I've prepared that's contingent on land use approval. Then there's the development agreement itself that goes into the details of what they would have to apply for and gain approval for. And then finally, there'd be a standalone covenant, which stays with the property. And some would say it's part of the deed, but it's a covenant that attaches to that property and runs with the land and enforces the affordability restrictions. So here's what AVS submitted to us, just as a refresher here. You see the parking, you see Ramsey, Nebraska, and the generalized shape of the building. So AVS indicated about a 14-month construction period, grand opening in approximately 2 years, and the construction timelines are enforced in the development agreement. So I anticipate that we'd be able to come to an agreement with AVS here within the next week or two and be ready to have council approve the contract in an open session at that point. So at this point, I think we put the alternatives in, but I think certainly we have the marching orders at this point based on the RFP award to go ahead and negotiate that. The terms are already set forth in the RFP, and the response to the RFP is really just kind of informational at this point. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Seeing all kinds of hands. We'll go Rob, Rick, Brian.
So the title of this slide, or the title of the presentation, is Affordable Housing. And when I look at the tenants cannot earn more than 60% of the area median income and rent cannot exceed 30%, it seems like this might be more accurately titled low-income housing, right? Or is there a difference between the two? Because this, to me, seems like it's low-income housing.
Well, if it's low-income housing, I suppose it would be affordable. I'm not sure that there's necessarily I don't think those are necessarily terms of art. I think that they're potentially synonymous. There's probably a lot of overlap. I think you're correct.
So, like, for instance, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, what are they using as a 60% of area median income or the rent? Do you know what those figures are?
I don't have them off the top of my head. I did have, Aaron, could you pull up that email I sent to you? Because I do have.
You could send it out in an email later, it's fine.
Okay, I do have numbers on what that would equate to on a per month rental.
Right.
I don't have numbers as far as what that would equate to for income, but the income actually is a sliding scale. So area median income, a 2-person household, 3-person household. So that part changes by the number of folks in the household.
And it also changes, I think, based on when ultimately the contract gets signed and what year you're talking about, because that'll vary.
Sure,
a
and
little
so
bit
that,
also.
obviously, 20 years down the road, those numbers change and they roll with the latest AMI, area median income.
There is a different, by the way, it's 80% for low income, 60% for affordable. So
Okay.
I just looked it up.
Thank you for that
I do know there is a
clarification.
difference.
Rick?
Thank you, Mark. So you said this is informational, so I'm implying or understanding from you that this contract's already been discussed with AVS and they're in total agreement of it?
No, that's not correct. And as a matter of fact, I finished all the 3 documents today.
Okay.
And so I'm going to be providing them to AVS today.
So when you prepared those documents, did they provide you, I want to say, maybe it's the wrong term, any ground rules for what they're looking in the contract?
No, but I would say the main terms are certainly provided for in the response to the RFP. So we got price, we have the types of units they're going to build, we have the area median income restrictions, and to me those are the big 3 items: what they're building, the sale price, and the income restrictions.
Okay. So refresh my memory, when we had our original presentation from the before the previous council, wasn't there a little bit of some confusion as to what AVS was proposing, because it looked like they might be including high-income housing as well as some low-income housing with that proposal originally? Do you recall?
I think Brad has a comment.
So we received supplemental response to the RFP, and in that supplemental response, they did clarify that it is seniors and it is at that 80% or below.
Okay, you said 80%
I'm sorry,
below, and
60.
this is 60%.
We've got too many numbers floating around. Yeah, 60.
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
Yes.
And that covers 100% of the units, if that's what you're asking about.
Okay, well, what I was concerned, originally, we have a shortage of housing, and if, in order to guarantee that this sale goes through, I did not want to be in support of these requirements if it meant that would be the difference of them proceeding or not proceeding. So as long as they're happy with these requirements, I think this is a win-win deal no matter which way. We get housing, but we also have get low-income housing as well.
Their RFP response stipulated to this.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I have a question about the income and rent restrictions that would be enforced by the restrictive covenant. Is there a set time period for that?
30 years.
Thank you.
Question? Valerie?
Yes, my question is, and it kind of went off, is there an ability to put a time limit on their coming back? The reason I say that is because I've kind of heard that, and at one point in time when they first came forward, they were kind of dependent upon finding a nonprofit to work with them, because this project is dependent upon tax credits.
Right.
And there is a cycle, and I don't know how close we are to the cycle, but if I'm not mistaken, it is like going on right now. Does anybody know that cycle?
That's for getting some federal dollars, I think, to help with the project, which they didn't seem to be extremely concerned about. They are in the process of, they do have a nonprofit that they work with regularly. They're based out of Seattle, and they're considering that nonprofit to be part of this for the management of the project. However, we did, in our conversations with them a week or two ago, ask that they make sure that they continue to do some outreach to our local nonprofits, like in Jackson and Josephine County, to see if they may be interested in being the ones to manage that. And they said that they would be reaching out to them to consider that also.
Okay, so they do have a nonprofit that, in terms of going after those tax credit amounts, because it was my understanding that they did need to have that to fund this program. So I just wanted to make sure. And then the last thing I wanted to have is them sitting on this property for years if they were unable to get the funding and not move forward. So I don't know whether there's
Yeah, so
a
that's
way to put
provided-
that into the contract.
Yeah, that's provided for in the development agreement, is certain construction timelines. So the development agreement proposes that vertical construction is completed within 24 months and they receive certificate of occupancy within 24 months of execution of the development agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Or I'm sorry, of approval of the entitlements.
Okay, so in other words, they have 24 months if they're approved with the entitlements. If they're not approved with the entitlements, can they just continue to sit on the property?
No. So the sale does not close until after the entitlements are approved. So the development agreement would provide, they have to submit an application within a certain time frame of executing the development agreement. That development agreement requires them to go ahead and I think it would be site plan review, I believe would be the formal type of land use decision required.
Okay.
From there, once they get final approval, they have 24 months to achieve certificate of occupancy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, DJ has a question on the phone, or comment maybe.
Yeah, I just have a comment. This is an exciting thing. They would have a tendency to trust the developers to honor the covenants, the restrictions thereof. They have a willingness to do so. They've shown a capability of doing so. I'm excited that we've received such a healthy response, and I'm willing to move forward with this contract.
Okay, is there any, you guys want to move forward with putting this on a future meeting? Valerie?
I just guess I'd like to move forward with this and move it on, is this what I'm saying? So that's what I would like to move forward from this meeting with them to have the agreement sale move
Right.
forward.
So what my recommendation is, I'll just notify council once I think we have something to move forward with, rather than put a specific date. I expect it'll be in the very near future, though.
Sounds good. Any further questions? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Sorry, we got that one out of order. I missed it. Now we will entertain a motion to adjourn. Valerie?
I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Second from Rob. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. See you all next Monday.